Les gens, les boxeurs qui sont très agressifs, ils ont toujours ces t-shirts un peu à la Tyson, là, les shorts du cou,
When I say you must obey, just like the both of you took them out.
Et là, Maïva, c'est son milieu.
Ouais, magnifique crochet. Magnifique shot.
Ah, c'est un vrai coup au corps.
Et ouais, le crochet au foie, il a touché.
Ah, c'est un vrai coup au corps.
Pendant Bigbois, encore un rouge.
Allez,
très dur là, qui a arrêté.
oui, forcément, elle remet un genou au sol.
Et alors, regarde son point.
I'm sure by now most of you have heard about the back and forth action via Twitter involving two of the welterweight division's reigning champions, Errol Spence, Terrence Crawford. Spence had this to say. He said, "Y'all can believe the BS if y'all want. I don't duck nothing."
Could've fooled me.
To which the sister of Terrence Crawford, Letitia Crawford, replied, "Make the fight then." Errol Spence replied to that with, "It goes both ways, missus." At this point, Terrence Crawford, the man himself, says, "So what's been the holdup, homie?
Huh?
When I came to the division, y'all said I had to get a title first. Now you change your mind, talking about wrong side of the street. So I'm just here for another excuse. What's up?" Went on to say, "I'm ready when you ready. Matter of fact, I've been ready before I even had a fight at 147. Like I've been saying, you got these people fooled, but not me. Whenever you get back right, I smoke you. All you gotta do is sign a contract and I'm on your head. Keep defending him. Because I'm gonna tell all y'all now, and I mean what I say. When the day come, when I knock him out, I want all y'all to keep the same energy. Because he gonna go cry in the car. He wasn't built for this shit I got over here. Just watch me show the world. And stop using fucking promoters, managers, and advisors for that weak-ass excuse y'all doing. They work for us, y'all dumb motherfuckers. If y'all really want to fight, then you tell them. I don't give two fucks. That's who I want to fight. Let your nuts drop. You say you your own boss." Errol Spence Jr. Now, Errol Spence, having seen these comments from Terrence Crawford some hours after they were posted, replied with, "It sound good. Only time I hear your shit is social media. Don't act like a boss now, like he don't handle your shit. We been told your handler Bob what it take to make it happen. I don't choke off smoke, dude." He's also quoted as saying, "The fight's not going to get made on here. Here being via social media." And I find that odd when most of the time it just so happens that it's the PBC guys that make their feelings known via social media, whether it's Errol Spence or Gervonta Davis. You know, these are the guys with the Twitter fingers. Nevertheless, that's what Errol Spence had to say about that. Like many of us, former world champion Ishe Smith caught wind of these comments and responded with this, saying that the two best welterweights in the world have to fight on Twitter because their promoters won't put down their egos and make the goddamn fight for the fans. Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. make that shit happen. And it's funny that Ishe Smith, who should have the inside track on things more or less, it's funny that Ishe Smith wants to attribute the situation to promoters' egos getting in the way when Errol Spence doesn't have a promoter. Remember? He was actually being pursued by promoters, several promoters, and it was Errol Spence himself that said he doesn't need one. He makes the decisions. So don't go blaming it on promoters when Errol Spence, at least according to Errol Spence, he doesn't even have a promoter. He's the one who makes the decisions. Thus, if the fight hasn't happened, he is responsible. Just as well, it was Errol Spence himself who stood on a podium and started talking about networks and sides of the street. Yet Errol Spence here today has no exclusivity contract with either Showtime or Fox. That's why he was able to float from one to the other, because he's got no network contract preventing him from fighting on some other network.
Exactly.
Errol Spence, by all accounts, is a network free agent, as many of the PBC's fighters are. It's for this reason these guys go back and forth from Fox to Showtime, back over to Showtime, back over to Fox, because none of these guys have an exclusivity contract with either of those two networks. These are just more insurmountable excuses, obstacles, roadblocks that Errol Spence deliberately puts up to put distance between himself and Terrence Crawford. And this has been going on for well over 12 months. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed at this point to find an angle of this story that we haven't already covered here on the channel. For the last year, Errol Spence and Errol Spence's fans have been very busy moving goalposts and cooking up narratives. Their favorite seems to be that, Terence Crawford costed himself all those fights with all those PBC fighters by re-signing with Top Rank, which is pure comedy at this point because isn't Tyson Fury a Top Rank guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, and isn't he about to fight Deontay Wilder?
Yeah.
A PBC guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's Errol Spence's excuse? I mean, it's very funny that, the first time out, Tyson Fury wasn't in bed with Top Rank or ESPN. He wasn't signed to either of those entities, you understand? He had no commitments to those outfits. Those outfits didn't come into the picture until after the first fight had already taken place. And the terms of what is to be the rematch, all of that, had to be renegotiated, restructured, to not only include Top Rank this time, but ESPN as well. Yet in spite of all these particulars that needed to get ironed out, they did. And the fight's going down this February, on the 22nd. So what's Errol Spence's excuse? I mean, how do you sit there saying that Terence Crawford's on the wrong side of the street when, hey, he's on the same side of the street as Tyson Fury, and Tyson Fury's about to fight one of the guys under your banner. So that makes what you're saying little more than just an excuse. An excuse for you to keep avoiding putting distance between you and that guy. In the past, we've heard PBC fighters promote free agency on several fronts. Deontay Wilder claiming that he is a network free agent, that he can go anywhere to fight anyone. Errol Spence promoting free agency, that he doesn't have a promoter and he doesn't need one. The virtue of free agency is that it allows you to travel wherever you need to travel, to anybody's
outfit,
network, anybody's outfit, to make the big fights happen. That's the virtue of free agency, that there's little to nothing stopping you from fighting anybody's set of fighters, anybody's stable of guys. That's the virtue of free agency.
if that's what you really are.
But for all this free agency talk, I mean, when have you ever seen either Wilder or Errol Spence travel to somebody else's network to have a fight?
Huh?
You've seen the opposite of that.
No, I have.
Yet these are the guys that claim they're network and promotional free agents. It doesn't really look that way. Errol Spence, he says he's his own boss, that he calls the shots, that he's the A-side. But if he is in fact the A-side, doesn't that then mean that the responsibility of issuing out the offers to a Terence Crawford, for example, doesn't that then mean that the responsibility of issuing out offers to the likes of a Terence Crawford falls on Errol Spence? If you're the A-side, Brody, that's on you. You gotta send out the offers if that's what you really are.
Yeah.
But as it stands, Errol Spence has never offered Terence Crawford anything to accept or reject.
Why is that?
In a year's time, in over a year's time. Yet it's Errol Spence who claims he's the A-side. Well, it's either you're the A-side and you don't want to offer him anything because you don't want the fight, or in reality, you're not the A-side and someone else is in control. Either way, it reflects poorly on Spence because he's the one who took to the public saying that he's the A-side.
You sure?
This is a common sense argument. It really is, that if Errol Spence is the A-side, then the burden of sending out the offers and getting the ball rolling would be on him, if he were in fact the A-side. It's a common sense argument. At its base, that's what it is. That's what most things are. But common sense, as we all know, isn't very common, and a lot of it is lost mincing words with the mouth breathers that support Errol Spence, the PBC, and everything that they do. They'll tell you in a heartbeat that Errol Spence is the A-side, but what they won't tell you is, okay, if he's the A-side, as you say, as you believe, then why hasn't he sent Terence Crawford an offer yet? Why was he more enthusiastic to fight a blown-up lightweight when it's supposed to be strap season? Mikey Garcia brought no strap for you to win, but you prioritized that over a Terence Crawford fight. Now these talking points might seem familiar to some, repetitious even to others, and to others they might come as revelations, things that they didn't necessarily realize, didn't necessarily take stock of. As I stated at the beginning of this video, there's very little new ground to cover when it comes to this conversation because we've already been here and done that. The general idea is that Errol Spence has to take care of business on his side of things before he squares off with Terence Crawford. But that pecking order isn't a requisite. You understand? It's not necessary for you to do it that way. You just want to do it that way. You're waiting on Manny Pacquiao to give you the time of day. Even after Boo Boy Fernandez and Sean Gibbons, Manny Pacquiao's manager, have already gone on to say after the Thurman fight that the winner of Sean Porter versus Spence, they may not get that fight. They're looking at Danny and they're looking at Mikey. But who they're not looking at is the winner of that fight. So if the story is that you're putting a Crawford fight on the back burner so that you could unify with Manny Pacquiao, well, you might not get that chance.
Nope.
You might not get that chance next, if you get that chance at all. So that's no excuse. That's no reason to keep the fight fans waiting. The fight fans who are so invested in this fight that boxing Twitter this morning looked a lot like World War III. This morning's pleasantries ended rather amicably between the two parties, between the two sides, both Errol Spence and Terence Crawford. They both agree that the fight will happen. They say that they both want it. But the question is when? When do they want it? When will it happen? You want to see the best versus the best while they're still at their best, while they're in their peak performance, while they're still in their prime. We don't want to wait till these guys are approaching their mid-30s before we see them lock horns with each other. I think that the fight fans have waited long enough. The question now is, when is enough going to be enough? When are we going to see this fight? That's a question we still don't have the answer to. In lightweight news, Fortuna versus Campbell WBC title fight negotiations extended until January 21st. Portion of the article reads, whether through an agreement or purse bid hearing, Fortuna and Campbell are due to collide for the vacant WBC lightweight title. The belt became available after previous claimant Devin Haney relinquished in exchange for designation as a champion in recess as he recovers from recent shoulder surgery. As luck would have it for Luke Campbell, this gives him an opportunity, yet a third opportunity, to become a world champion in the lightweight division. The first time he tried it, it was against the then WBA and Ring Magazine champion, Jorge Linares. And very recently, we saw Luke in action, looking very formidable against Vasyl Lomachenko in what was his second bid to become a world champion. As it stands, this will be his third. But then, like now, a live animal stands in front of him. I don't think that Javier is on the level of a Vasyl Lomachenko per se.
Nah.
But to look past him, to treat this situation as if it's a foregone conclusion,
Luke wins.
would be rather foolhardy, presumptuous, and short-sighted. Because Javier's a live animal in the 135-pound division the way that Luke Campbell's a live animal in the 135-pound division. These are two guys who have had their share of ups and downs. And their losses weren't losses to just any old body, you understand. They lost some fights. You know, Luke lost about 3 fights. Javier lost about 2 fights. Should be 3. Better still.
They lost to good fighters.
You know, both these guys, they've had their ups and their downs. But the guys that beat Javier and the guys that beat Luke Campbell, they weren't just anybody, you know. These weren't Joe Blows. It took high-caliber, high-quality guys to beat these guys. And in that way, they face a similar situation against each other. That they're operating at more or less the same level. I can tell you that Javier comes to fight. But so does Luke, and given Luke's generous dimensions for the weight, he stands a legitimate chance of becoming a world champion, but it all depends on how he treats the situation. You know, Luke Campbell's only ever lost to good fighters. Good fighters, top 10 guys, world champions. His first loss came at the hands of Ivan Mendy, a guy who's ranked in the top 10 of the division here today. He avenged that loss to Ivan Mendy, by the way. Obviously, he lost to Jorge Linares and Vasyl Lomachenko, who I mentioned earlier. When it comes to Javier, you know, Javier's got 2 recorded losses. One coming by way of a split decision against Robert Easter, and another TKO stoppage at the hands of Jason Sosa. Jason actually gave Javier his first professional loss back in 2016. That's right, that's the way that cookie crumbled. And this is a very interesting situation that has more to it than it appears on the surface, because it just so happens that Javier is a PBC fighter, always managed by Sampson and Lukowicz, but the banner that he fights under, it is the PBC banner. And
If he wins,
if Javier wins this fight, he takes that green belt back over to the PBC side of things. If he wins, that's right. And one can hypothesize that if a green belt ends up on that side of the street, it's a belt that in all likelihood Gervonta Davis will be willing to fight for. And if he wins the belt, you can almost guarantee you're never going to see it again. He's going to hold it hostage until he blows the weight or decides to move up. So yeah, there's things to be addressed here. There are repercussions.
consequences.
An agreement that would see this fight coming off on a particular date hasn't been finalized yet, you understand. The negotiation period has been extended. But if these two sides can't iron out a deal, you know, Luke Campbell and Javier Fortuna, PBC and Matchroom, if they can't iron out a deal, this thing's going to go to purse bid. And once it does, it's going to go to the highest bidder, who's willing to put up the most money to stage the fight. If it goes to a purse bid, I just so happen to think that Matchroom is more invested in Luke Campbell than the PBC is invested in Javier Fortuna. So if it goes to a purse bid, in all likelihood it's a purse bid that Matchroom can and will win. However, it may not get that far. They may be able to reach a deal amicably because Javier's people have got to know that he doesn't have a following here, that Campbell versus Fortuna isn't worth as much money in the US as it is in the UK. Thus, reaching an agreement could prove to be lucrative not just for Luke, but for Javier as well. You stage that fight here. In spite of it being a title fight, it's a fight that would fly under the radar because people don't follow Javier Fortuna and even less people follow Luke Campbell. If that guy's got a name, it's a name he's got in the UK because he represented them in the Olympics because he won the gold. So that fight more or less has the same principle that the Vasyl Lomachenko fight had, to where you could fight Luke Campbell in America, but it won't do what it could do in the UK. And as we all know, we've got the numbers. Hindsight is 2020. That was a successful event. In all likelihood, Campbell versus Fortuna would be a more successful event in the UK than the US. Thus, Samson Lukowicz and Javier Fortuna have no reason to resist traveling to have this fight because as a result, they may end up making more money. And they might have their reservations about home field advantage going to Luke, but given the price tag and just given how Javier goes about things, Javier's not a guy who goes out there looking to win a points decision. This is a scrapper. This is a guy that comes to fight. This is a guy who's more likely to look for a knockout than to look for a judge's scorecard. I think with these things in mind, they may just reach an amicable situation devoid of a purse bid. I do have a rooting interest in Luke Campbell winning the belt because of what could happen thereafter. If Luke wins the belt, he's more likely to defend it against Devin than Javier would be. If Javier wins the belt, it turns into a cross-promotional, cross-platform situation, and we all know how difficult those situations can be. Whereas if Luke wins it, it's Matchroom Guy against Matchroom Guy, and the fight in all likelihood would be featured on DAZN in America and Sky in the UK, an entirely doable situation with minimal friction. If Javier wins the belt, that might not be the case. We know there are no shortage of situations like this, dicey situations, to where a fight might not happen because two sides want two very different things, and sometimes fights don't materialize as a result. I mean, we just talked about this. So, you know, I'm just hoping that the fight gets made with minimal friction, and I am holding out hope, I am, that Luke becomes a world champion. I'm hoping that he's the one who emerges the WBC's full-fledged champion at 135.